I turned 30 this year and realized I wasted my 20s on self-improvement. I know it sounds like a paradox. The promise of self-improvement is to turn us into the best version of ourselves. And so how did I end up becoming a better version of myself, yet regretting a large portion of it? Well, every waking hour I was consumed by this obsession. 1 hour at the gym, grinding at my business, meditating, making art, eating to perfection, and always reading the latest business books. I thought that this was the path towards becoming happy, but it became the path towards making this video, shattering the illusion of self-improvement and exposing the side effects no motivational video has ever warned you about. The first problem with self-help is that it makes me feel like I have an issue with something I don't actually have an issue with. And so here's what would happen. I would be working 60 hours a week, grinding at my business, having a good work-life balance, and generally being healthy and happy. And then I would read in some book about a guy that works 80 hours a week, also has 16 children, and runs 62 marathons every single week. And now I would feel terrible. And so in those moments, I would then also oftentimes start to punish myself internally, because I would be thinking that I wasn't good enough, not pushing myself hard enough, not working hard enough, and obviously this made me feel even worse. Now you might be asking yourself, what's the problem with being inspired by someone who is working harder, runs more marathons, and has more children? Well, the first problem is that we don't actually get enough information from these books, from these videos, from TV, whatever information source that you are using. For all we know, this guy is not actually that good at running marathons, but just finishes them. He doesn't actually take care of the children because his wife is doing all of that. And for the 80 hours a week, he actually spends 30 hours talking with co-workers and 20 hours fantasizing about random things that don't actually matter. And so we only see a very small portion of him. And then we are using that very small portion to make us feel bad. And this is a problem with the modern day social comparison theory. The social comparison theory is a psychological concept that suggests individuals determine their own self-worth and evaluate their abilities and opinions by comparing themselves to others. The problem is that we don't get to see real people anymore to compare ourselves to. The social medias give us the PR version, the highlight reels of influencers, and the books give us the PR version of these smart intellectuals and only show us what they want us to see. And this was not a problem for thousands of years, because we used to live in small communities, and so sure, you would meet some hunter that is way better at hunting than you, but you wouldn't feel terrible about that because you would also interact with them on a daily basis or several times a week, and so you would know that they are not good at taking care of the children or not good at building houses, building tents, whatever these old historian people were doing. And so instead of feeling bad about your newfound identity as 600 ELO hunter, you would also be happy about your 1800 ELO builder capacity. And for some reason, I also don't know why, it took me 10 years to realize that the social comparison theory, this thing that is hardwired in our brains for thousands of years biologically speaking, doesn't actually work anymore in the 21st century, because we don't have honest representations of people on social media or in books or in any media form that you are consuming. And so what happened for me after reading hundreds of business books is that in certain areas my self-esteem went down. In certain areas my confidence went down. And that was the exact opposite of what I was trying to gain from these books in the first place. Now why is this so important? Well, it shows us the difference between self-help and self-discovery. The first one makes us feel inferior to others by showing us the highlight reels only, while self-discovery is making us fall in love with every aspect of ourselves while building ourselves up and becoming better. Now you might be thinking by yourself, I can improve myself through self-help without feeling inferior, and this doesn't actually apply to me. Well, in that case, there's still the question, did you actually improve yourself? And I would argue that in most cases you didn't. Most people are other people. They copy-paste other people's behavior. They copy-paste other people's opinions. They buy the product that other people are buying. And generally speaking, they become like everyone else. And the self-help industry industry is encouraging this type of copy-pasting behavior. And so sure, you might be improving, but improving in that sentence means becoming more like everyone else. And I would argue that the world doesn't actually need more people like every other person on the globe. Now let's imagine that you are not becoming like everyone else and actually becoming very original because you're smart about the way you are copying and you are transforming things into your own style. Well, then there is still one more reason why you might actually be living in an illusion of improvement without actually improving yourself. I call it the Fiji Island theory. So they've done this research on the Fiji Islands that clearly illustrates how impossible self-improvement through consuming content actually is. So in the 1970s, they observed that no woman on the Fiji Islands had any type of eating disorder, anorexia, negative body images whatsoever. And then in 1995, they introduced the television to that population and they looked at a group of young girls and suddenly observed that 13% of them developed some kind of eating disorder, a negative body image, or even in some cases anorexia. And then 3 years later, only 3 years later, in 1998, they did the same research again and observed that the number went from 13% to 29% in the time span of 3 years. To 29%. Now what's interesting about this study is that they also looked at the body weight of those women, and what they found was that the body weight stayed the same throughout the whole experience, throughout the whole period of time. And so the reality of their weight remained the same, but the perception of that reality changed dramatically. And so they were going on diets, they were trying to lose weight, they were trying to improve themselves because of what they saw on television. But in reality, nothing actually happened. This is the problem with self-improvement. We don't have anorexia, we don't have a problem with our weight, and then we read a book about some guy that's jacked and gets all the girls, and suddenly we think we have a problem with our weight. And so a question we should ask ourselves is, are these girls improving themselves? Because they are going on diets, they are trying to improve themselves, but in reality, objectively speaking, they remain the same. It's just all in their head. And so what we can conclude is that there's at least a problem with trying to improve yourself based on other people's content, other people's ideas of self-improvement, other people's problems. When it comes to checking information for whether or not it is valuable, informative, accurate, the most common strategies that float around in the world are checking the credibility of the source of information, checking whether the person knows what they're talking about, whether they have credentials to back things up. Another strategy is to do cross-referencing and see if multiple sources are saying the same types of things, which would make it more likely that the thing that they're saying is actually true. Now, the problem with all of these common, very famous strategies is that they are very complex and they will usually take you hours to do them, and so nobody actually does that. I never consume a YouTube video and then start to check if there's evidence to back up their claims. Who the fuck does that? And so ideally we need strategies that are way easier, that we can do in a matter of seconds, and that generate the same type of results. And so let's talk about that. The first strategy is counterfactual thinking, something I learned from Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum. And it goes as follows. If some book, some guru, some YouTuber online gives you a particular advice, you can ask yourself the following two questions. Number one, what would this person say if the advice is true? Number two, what would the person say if the advice is wrong or untrue? Now, if the answer to the first question and the second question are approximately the same as what they actually said, then you can be certain that this piece of information is an unfalsifiable claim and usually doesn't bring you any extra value and is anecdotal at best, and certainly not something that you should feel bad about for not doing. Now, another way to do counterfactual thinking is by asking yourself if there is an alternative scenario in which the advice is not true. Let's say, for example, that there is a book titled The 5 AM Club, in which the author explains how a billionaire gives the advice to wake up at 5 AM as the key to success, as the key to becoming a billionaire yourself. Now, in this particular scenario, you can ask yourself, are there billionaires that are billionaires and don't wake up at 5 AM? And the answer is, of course, yes, these people exist. And so this piece of advice, even though it might be valuable for some people, is to some extent anecdotal, it's unfalsifiable, and it's generally not something you should be feeling bad about if you don't wake up at 5 a.m. Now, does this mean that waking up very early cannot be valuable? Of course it can be valuable. And does this mean that on my channel there are no pieces of advice that don't pass the counterfactual thinking test? Of course not. There are a lot of pieces of advice that are anecdotal because they are what I do. They come from my personal experience, and for some that will be valuable, for others it will not. This concept of counterfactual thinking simply allows us to know which pieces of information we should feel bad about because they're really good and we should definitely do them, and which pieces of information we should not feel bad about because they are anecdotal and not the most important piece of information in the world. The second strategy is the practicality testability test. Testability test, wow. So what you are going to do is you listen to a piece of information and then you ask yourself, can I test it out in real life? Can I actually do this thing that they're saying? And if the answer is yes, then there's usually some kind of valuable component to it, or at least the potential for a valuable component. And so if we go back to the example of waking up at 5 a.m. in the morning, you can absolutely test it out for yourself and see if it works and see if there are benefits that enrich your life in some kind of way. And I'm sure there will be benefits to waking up early for a lot of people. Now, there are also self-help, self-improvement examples that don't pass this test. For example, affirmations. There are people who say that affirmations work, that if you say in the morning 3 times that you are a millionaire, that you will become a millionaire by doing that. This type of affirmation strategy is not testable, it's not practical, because if you would be doing this because some guru told you to for a whole year, every single morning, and it doesn't work, and then you go to the guru and you tell them, well, I did this affirmations thing and it doesn't work, then they will simply tell you, you didn't try hard enough, you didn't believe hard enough. And so then you start all over again. And by the way, this affirmations thing also doesn't really pass the counterfactual thinking test. And so these pieces of information are usually not pieces of information that you should listen to, and definitely not something that you should feel bad about because you're not doing that in the morning. The third strategy is absolutely the best strategy that I came across to make sure I'm never falling for that self-improvement addiction trap. It's called the 90-10 rule. So in my early 20s, I would watch motivational videos on YouTube from Jordan Peterson, Gary Vaynerchuk, or any other guy that I could grab my hands on. And then I would feel extremely inspired, extremely ready, energized to do the work. And so I would start making a to-do list of how the perfect day would look like. And then a couple of minutes later, I would start fantasizing about me doing all of those things and how amazing my life would be if I would be executing on this list. And then at the end of the day, nothing would have happened, and the next day I would go back to procrastinating, but now with a newfound sense of crippling incompetence and insecurity. So what can we learn from this? Well, it's not consuming the inspiration that is the problem. It's not being inspired that is the problem. It's consuming without execution that is the actual problem. What I was doing is the equivalent of reading a cookbook and then never actually cooking, which sounds ridiculous, but for some reason in the self-help industry, in the self-improvement industry, that is what most people are doing. They are just consuming the recipes and never actually executing on them. And the solution to this problem that I found works best for me is following the 90-10 rule, where you study 10% of your time and execute 90% of your time. This simple rule keeps me grounded to the cause and keeps me grounded to the goals that I have. Before that, a couple of years earlier, at the peak of my consumption addiction, at the peak of my self-improvement addiction, I was reading 3 business books every single week. And I was reading 30, 40, 50 summaries of books those same weeks. And so the problem with this is that, number one, you are absolutely not going to execute on all of those pieces of information because there are way too much pieces of information and there's way too little time to execute on them. And so what happens is that the awareness of things that you are not doing increases way faster than your ability to do, which generates all of that insecurity and generates that feeling of, wow, all these people are so much better than me. And it also results in having a lot of books that are not in line with what you actually want to be doing, because there are only so many things that you're doing and there are way more books out there. And so I was reading random business books that people that I admired advised, but were not really in line with what I was doing and the goals that I was having. I think the point of this video is best summed up by looking at old pictures from Mark Zuckerberg or Andy Warhol, where you see that they are not having a good diet. They're eating hamburgers, they have sodas on their desks, not organized, they're definitely not doing the perfect morning routine or something. And it shows us that it's okay to not be perfect. These great men achieved greatness without the perfect diet, for example. By the way, I have another video called I Wasted My 20s Pursuing My Dreams and Passions. Link in the description and in the end screen. That said, get the hell out of here.